work? Yeah? There we go. Cool. Hi, everyone. So first off, thanks for having me. First time that I've ever kind of met the Paris Android user group. So yeah, thank you very much. So what I'm going to be doing to start off with this presentation is just kind of give you an introduction to Google TV. Because it's launched in so many European countries now, it's the first time a lot of people are getting access to it. So it's just giving you kind of a brief overview of what it is, what it's about, and how you can start targeting it. So if we can go to the slides. No? Okay, so I'm just going to talk about what's going on. Maybe? There we go. Cool. So the first question is going to be obviously what is Google TV? And the main purpose of it is to be the open platform for smart TVs. Much like mobile phones and tablets, it got to that point where you were getting so much fragmentation targeting the different mobile phone manufacturers. And it's becoming exactly the same with the smart TVs. Each OEM has their own platform, and many developers are getting to that point where they're going, I've developed this app and it works on this TV. I try it on another TV in exactly the same series of TVs, and it doesn't work. And then a couple of days later, they get a firmware update without any prior kind of knowledge, and then suddenly it breaks on the TV that it used to work on. So Google TV, the aim of this is to exactly do what Android done, and just make it so much easier for developers to start targeting these smart TVs. So obviously we had something that works pretty damn well at this, Android. I always have to put this slide in because it's one of our team members who built these. So we're running Honeycomb 3.2 at the moment. And essentially it gives you access to all of the APIs that you're used to, along with the framework that works so well at scaling up across different size screens and just all the good stuff of Android. But we've obviously changed some stuff. So this is just a screenshot from the launcher. But we've added certain things. So the Google TV platform has additional codecs, because obviously with it being a TV, you need it to play video just as well as any other platform. It's just a bit more important because it's in the living room. And there are two main development options, and I'm going to touch a little bit on both, which may be slightly controversial for a Paris Android user group, but there's more stuff on Android, but there's a little bit on Chrome, because a lot of the smart TV platforms out there, they're actually already relying on a different standard, HBB TV, which is kind of a cut-down version of HTML5. And obviously, we're getting a lot of people coming across to us because we've got Chrome. We don't have the default browser. We get a lot of speed and a lot of stuff that just comes for free. So we're getting a lot of existing web apps just instantly coming straight to the platform. So this slide is already out of date, but we've launched in a number of countries internationally now. So US, Germany, France, Netherlands. I think we've launched in Brazil and Mexico now. I think we've only got Canada that's remaining on that list. It might have already been released. Someone from Sony can shout out if I'm not quite right. But this is fantastic news. I mean, we've been waiting a long time to kind of do this. So yeah, it's absolutely fantastic that we finally got out there. But over in the US, there are obviously other devices. And IFA over in Berlin, we announced another couple of partners. So we've got Hisense and Samsung who are launching Google TVs as well. And the main purpose of this slide is, obviously, if you guys start targeting this, you need to be aware of what devices are out there. And plus, it kind of illustrates the differences that hardware manufacturers are kind of going with the platform. So the LG one is actually built into the TV. It's got a completely different remote to the other two manufacturers. And they're also getting to the point where you're seeing these kind of regular things on smart TVs where there's a specific button for certain apps. So it's interesting to see how each OEM are actually taking the platform and taking a direction that they want to go. And much like Android, we're obviously seeing certain customizations that are going on. So we've got the Sony TV up the top, which is just running the stock Google TV framework. LG's kind of customized it to have this grid layout. And then the Vizio in the end, they've gone for something completely different. And obviously with Google TV, just like Android, they can do these things, and you can do exactly the same as well. You can replace these launchers, everything else, exactly the same. So as a developer, you might be sitting there going, well, this is great, it's launched, but what's the catch? Do I really want to be involved in this? I've got enough kind of tablet and phone stuff going on. And at the moment, it's actually getting to a point where in an average household, you've got more TVs than people. which is just an absolutely mind-blowing kind of fact. But it's getting to the point where people are spending about 5 hours a day in front of their TV sets watching TV. And our goal isn't necessarily to stop them from watching TV, but we want to change the content that they're getting access to. If there's other stuff they're not already reaching that we can do via an app or some other source, we want to give the user access to that content. We also want to change the way they're finding content. And it may get to the point where perhaps 5 hours a day, there's just some of that time where they're not actually wanting to watch TV. They just got nothing to do. They just want to sit down and chill out. And that's something that you can sort of step in on. And then the rest of the day, the 19 hours that's left over, is something else that you guys can start taking advantage of. Start changing the way they're looking at their TV, changing the way they're interacting with it. And all of the reports and all the stats and the research that's going into this is suggesting that smart TVs, one way or another, they're on the rise. The amount of sales that are going on, the number of households that have got them, the number of people that are using apps on their TVs, it's all on the rise. So one of the biggest differences when you start developing for Google TV is obviously the UI. You're moving out of a realm from where you're having a one-to-one interaction between one person and their device. You're moving into essentially an interaction between yourself and a much larger screen much further away. And there's a big misconception that you're essentially taking your tablet UI and you can just put that on the TV and then that's it. You should be good to go, right? But because you're developing for a 10-foot user experience interface, you're actually getting more to the point where it's actually like a mobile phone. If you hold it about arm's length, that's sort of the size that you're actually seeing your TV at from the distance. So it's actually a bit more similar to actually developing for a phone than it is for a tablet. And this slide always kind of illustrates the point quite well, that you get to a stage where mobile phones, you can only show so much information. Tablets, you can show a bit more. When you start moving to a TV, you actually want to start reducing the amount of information. And that's not just because of the distance. You also get to a point where people are in a bit of a different mode. They don't want to be sitting there and just consuming loads and loads of content. They're kind of in that mode where they just want to be gently given it. And then obviously you have the social aspect. Like I said before, you're not a one-to-one interaction. You're interacting with a screen that any number of people can see, and it's kind of the whole point of it. So then you have to start sitting there thinking, well, should I be concerned with privacy? Is this going to affect the user in any way that we really don't want them to affect with? It's kind of the main reason for SMS appearing on TV. Is that a good idea or not? But at the same time, is there something that your apps can start taking advantage of? We recently did a blog post for Greedy Spiders, and we sit there and we talk to that developer, and he kind of says, to be honest, it worked on TV, and we figured that would be a great way. It's just a nice, simple game. People just start playing around with it, and it's great for kids as well. But what we didn't realize is that if we start releasing on TV, people just start screaming at their TV screen, and everyone in the room is just doing exactly the same. So they didn't intend for it to be much of a social sort of exercise, but it became it on its own. So there's something to say this not going to happen to your apps, and essentially you can take advantage of that as well. And one of the most difficult things that developers start finding is the D-pad. It's kind of one of those things. Who had a G1 or a Magic or a Nexus 1? I'm expecting all the hands to kind of go up. Not that many. So essentially where you all had the scroll ball, you all kind of started, you pay attention to the focus state. That's kind of gone away now for most developers. You don't have to worry about it too much. But with Google TV, it's actually kind of the most important thing you can do. You don't want to be relying on the cursor. You really do want to be using the D-pad. And the main reason for that is everyone's in that lean-back mode. They just sit in there prodding away in the dark. They don't want to have to look at the remote. They don't want to have to focus on anything. They just want to use that up, down, left, right, enter. But obviously, there is still the cursor there. The biggest problem with this is it's a lot of effort for someone to actually ensure they get on those hit targets. It's kind of that age-old Fitz law. It's just a bit of a challenge for them compared to the D-pad. And most people, when they try and do something, they'll do it a couple of times. They'll realize there's a quicker way and then just stick to the quicker way and give up. And then you might have noticed this one on the end. It's a bit of kind of an edge case. That's more of a Wiimote style thing. And it's always interesting. Like I say, the OEMs, they're playing around with how they're going to interpret the Google TV system. And yeah, it's an interesting way of interacting with your TV. So as I was kind of saying, selection and focus is a big part of your apps. You need to ensure that you're doing it. So selection is just useful for informing the user where they are currently in the application. I think you can kind of get away with it a bit more on mobile and tablets than you can on TV, but you need to be basically keeping track and informing the user of where they've been, where they're actually currently now, and then plus use that to your advantage. Start sitting there going, well, if I'm focusing on that, I'll give you extra information. The previous version of this app, we actually just gave information for every single DVD that we actually had up. And most people said, I don't read that. I don't need it. I know which DVD I want. And if I don't, I'm still not really going to pay attention to about 90% of that information. So we did this, and most users actually found it a lot nicer. And yeah, the action bar. No point have I kind of shown a screenshot where the action bar has been prominent, and that's because we've actually moved it to the left-hand side. And I know this is kind of going against the Android design guidelines, but on TV there's a different guide. When you start looking at the interaction with the D-pad, because most mobile apps, you get to a point where you've actually got the action bar and then a long vertical list. That doesn't hold too much when you're actually using a D-pad. If you imagine you had focus on the home screen at the top, on the home icon in the top left, and then you said, I want to change a count. Let's say for just this purpose, it's down on the bottom. They've got to hit down. They go into the first element on the list view, down, 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 go through the list, get to the bottom, change a count, and then suddenly they say, oh, actually, I need to refresh the data. All the way back up in the action bar, up, all the way through the list, and then back up again. And this is what we're calling an interaction trap. And it gets even worse if you've got one of the lists where when you get to the bottom, it starts loading more results. So that's why we've kind of encouraging developers to go for this horizontal kind of design. And there's nothing to say if you want to use an action bar, that's great, do it, but then start thinking about using a horizontal kind of layout for your actual data rather than having vertical up and down. So for Android, there's a couple of tips. We've got a library project, which is the left nav bar. Now, what this will do is just, it's an implementation of an action bar, so you can literally just swap it out for your traditional action bar. And the main way that this works is when you focus onto the left nav bar, it actually expands out. Most of the apps that you see using this, so things like YouTube and some of the picture gallery apps, this is the default behavior. But you can get both of these at the samples URL there. And essentially, there's loads of options. You can play around with this quite a lot and do different ways of interacting with it. So it's worth having a little play with. For those who haven't played around with selectors and focus states, dead simple. It's just adding an extra drawable to your state list. And I've personally never had an issue with letting the system handle my focus, but the number of developer advocates on the Google TV team that include this, they seem pretty adamant that it's really, really useful. So they've got more experience than me. So I'm going to say, yeah, if you do need to take control of the focus, then literally just plumb in the IDs and just basically you dictate what the system's doing for you. Those of you who might be worried about graphics at this point, we're essentially on the large bucket, and we sit as XHDPI, and then we've also got HDPI for 720p. Now, we're technically TV DPI like the Nexus 7, but if you just use HDPI graphics, the system will scale it down, and they still look great. So that's the best option. And this is a little tip that I find ridiculously useful. There is the television specifier. If you do this, then that way it's an easy way of just working out whether you're running on a TV or not, just by setting up the values like this. Yeah, like I say, I found this ridiculously useful, and it's a much nicer way than some of the other solutions that are out there. As far as the SDK goes, there's kind of this misconception that you need this add-on to actually develop for Google TV. That's not true at the moment. At the moment, it's literally just for the Linux emulator. I think the intention is that when we start adding more and more APIs and libraries, this is where it's going to live. But at the moment, it's only the Linux emulator, so you don't actually need it. What you do need to do is if you've got a development box, you need to set up the IP address of your machine with the Google TV, then get the Google TV IP address, and then just tell ADB where to connect. So it's kind of a two-way pairing deal. So it's dead simple. You're literally just going through settings, getting to development options like you're used to. You enter in the IP address of your development machine. After that, you just make a note of the IP address of the Google TV box, and then literally just run ADB connect. After that point, it's just going to run exactly like you're used to in terms of it turning up into Eclipse or ADB devices. The brief note on Chrome UI tips. The biggest problem I see with a lot of the web apps out there, they don't do focus. They just simply don't do it. They rely on the cursor, and that's kind of one of the worst things that you can do. It just makes the app feel a lot more clunky than it needs to be. So this is a jQuery plugin that I've included. It takes care of a fair chunk of this, but if you've got a particularly complex UI or you're using Ajax and things are coming and going quite rapidly, it might not hold up, in which case the best bet is to just roll your own. It's exactly the same as the keyboard, up, down, left, right, keys, and enter. I've done some sample code that I've been working on that pretty much uses this and takes control of itself. And it's a really simple algorithm of just finding out the nearest item at runtime. So it can work, and it's nice and easy. There is also one other slight trick where to account for overscan on TVs, which is an issue that doesn't exist on mobile and tablets. And you'll notice when you launch a Google TV, it asks you to calibrate where exactly you stop seeing a blue border around it. That's to account for overscan. And in Chrome, we've actually got an algorithm that will zoom the page a little bit just to account for this so developers don't have to. But if you're trying to do a pixel-perfect screen, that kind of runs into issues. It actually can sometimes blow up or shrink. So you have two options. Either you can switch it off and just take full control yourself, or you can basically take this little chunk of code, and all it does is just say, this is the width of my page, this is the width of the screen, just ensure the zoom ratio is here, and you're basically correcting it yourself. If you stick to a responsive design, this doesn't become too much of an issue. So, yeah, I'd kind of stick with that. As far as trying to get to the point where you're testing against real-life users, we do a lot of internal studies, just watching people, how they use our apps, how they use the Google TVs. And if you ever get the chance of sitting down and watching someone using your app, I think it's a ridiculously powerful thing, especially in these early days. I mean, those of you who developed for 1.5, 1.6 of Android, you'll know that it was a very, very different time for Android when we didn't have the UI design patterns. And I think for Google TV, we're still exploring the different ways that people interact, trying to find the really solid, reliable design patterns. So I think if you ever get a chance to watch people, do, and see if there's things that literally don't make any sense in your designs, and start playing around with what makes a bit more sense. But if you can't actually sit and watch someone, then use Google Analytics. I've heard stories of people who have developed games and then gotten to a point where they've gone, look, we've got this killer feature and no one's actually using it. They're getting so far in the game and then they're just dropping out and we're losing everyone. And it was only through Google Analytics that they started seeing people just dropping off at the same point and then just saying, okay, just add in a tutorial, just another couple of screens of a tutorial, everything gets fixed and it goes away. So if you have this killer feature, analytics is the thing that's going to tell you whether it's getting used or not, and then you can sort of overcome it otherwise. So that's kind of the end of my first talk. Anyone got any questions? I think we might have a mic that's going to run around. What's the plan? Does this one work? Oh, cool. Go.
I've seen a few set-top boxes from operators or some manufacturers in China running stock Android 4.0 and 4.0, and some people seems to be happy to build on that. Do you think it's a threat for Google TV, actually?
So the main difference between Google TV and some of those boxes is, like I said, we require the extra additional codecs, but we also require manufacturers to stay up to date with the platform they basically have a minimum time where they actually have to update, providing that their hardware can handle it, which is unlike the Android set-top boxes. And plus, we have the HDMI pass-through. And the intention of that is to get to a point where we're integrating with set-top boxes. So over in the US, for example, you'll start getting to the point where you're getting your recorded stuff on your Google TV and explorable through that. So that's the main differentiation between Google TV and just stock Android like those boxes, is we're trying to get to a point where we're integrating much more closely with all of the hardware that exists in a home.
I have two questions. First is, hi.
Hello.
What will we do when the queue will come? And the second, when do we see it?
So I can't answer when you're going to see the queue because I don't even know the answer to that question. The queue was an interesting device because it was designed to have a sole purpose. It wasn't designed to be essentially something that is an all-round developer kind of accessible thing. So it was really focusing a niche feature, a niche market. And I think before they launched, they got to that point where they weren't sure whether they wanted to launch it or not. So I can't really speculate on what's going to happen with the queue, whether it's going to come back or not, etc. But its purpose is to focus on one function rather than a multitude.
Hi. So if I want to buy some Android boxes in China to resold in France, what is the process to obtain a CTS agreement?
So we're working with a select group of OEMs at the moment. We are expanding more and more, but we're trying to do it slowly and gradually, picking out the partners that makes most sense for us to work with. I think we're still getting to that point where we're kind of viewing this as a first step in a much sort of longer game, a longer journey even. So at the moment, you'd have to go through our kind of biz dev guys and go through those. And essentially, it just gets to the point where chances are we're probably talking with enough OEMs that are keeping us really, really busy as it is. So it just might take a bit of time, that's all.
Hi.
Hey, yeah.